It had been a morning like any other, coffee brewing, the faint hum of the shower as Catherine prepped for work, and me, Dean, flipping through emails at the kitchen counter. Married for 8 years, we had built what I thought was a solid life together. Catherine had just landed a dream role as the lead project manager at my advertising firm. At first, I had hesitated about the idea of working together, but she assured me it would only strengthen our bond. "You'll be the boss at work," she had joked over dinner when we celebrated her new job. "And I'll still be the boss at home." I laughed then, blissfully unaware of what was to come. On the surface, we had it all: mutual respect, chemistry that hadn't waned, and dreams of traveling more now that her career had taken off. Yet, in the background, I noticed the small things: late nights at the office becoming a routine, the constant text messages that made her smile before quickly locking her phone. I chalked it up to stress or the thrill of new responsibilities. "Don't wait up tonight," Catherine said as she rushed out the door. Her tailored blazer fit her perfectly, her makeup subtle yet flawless. She blew me a kiss, her auburn curls bouncing as she hurried out. "The meeting might go long." I smiled and waved, my mind already consumed with my plans to surprise her tomorrow. A weekend getaway had been overdue. I'd planned to drive her straight from the office Friday night to a secluded cabin by the lake, a place where work couldn't intrude. That day at work, everything felt normal. Catherine stopped by my office to grab some files, her energy vibrant as always. "You should take it easy, Dean. You're looking stressed," she teased, running a hand over my shoulder before heading off to her own team. I smiled at her retreating figure, proud of her accomplishments. Later that evening, I found myself preparing dinner for one. The silence of the house was broken only by the faint buzz of Catherine's favorite sitcom playing in the background. By the time she came home, her cheeks were flushed, and there was a faint whiff of wine. "How was the meeting?" I asked casually, sipping my whiskey as she leaned against the doorframe. "Grueling," she said, sighing and kicking off her heels. "You know how these clients are, always demanding the impossible." She planted a quick kiss on my forehead before heading upstairs to shower. Something about her rushed affection felt off, but I ignored it. Tomorrow's surprise would wash away all the fatigue of her endless hours at the office. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, Catherine already fast asleep, I stared at the ceiling, planning every detail of our weekend. Little did I know that everything I believed in was about to unravel. The next morning started like clockwork, Catherine heading to work early while I pretended to be too busy with emails to arouse suspicion about my surprise plans. She kissed me goodbye at the door, her scent lingering as the front door clicked shut. It was only after she left that I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and staring at my phone. A growing itch in the back of my mind told me something wasn't right. Maybe it was her increasingly distant gaze when we spoke, or the way she was always glued to her phone. But doubt felt like betrayal, so I buried it. I called her assistant, Rachel, from the office under the pretense of checking her schedule. "Hey Rachel, it's Dean," I said casually, swirling the last of my coffee in its mug. "Quick favor, Catherine left the house in a rush. Can you check what time her meetings end tonight?" There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of a keyboard clattering. "Actually, Catherine blocked out her schedule for the afternoon. No meetings past 3. That was strange. Catherine had been claiming to stay late at the office for weeks. "Thanks, Rachel," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just wanted to make sure I wouldn't disrupt anything." I set the phone down, the gnawing suspicion now a full-blown ache in my chest. For years, I'd trusted Catherine implicitly. She had always been the kind of woman who made you believe she could do no wrong. But this felt off. I had planned to let her finish her day uninterrupted, but curiosity gnawed at me. Instead of staying glued to my laptop, I grabbed my keys and decided to surprise her at work earlier than planned. A bouquet of her favorite lilies sat in the passenger seat as I drove, hoping my gesture would be a charming lead-in to our weekend getaway. The office parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. Catherine's sleek black sedan was parked in her usual spot, but as I glanced around, I noticed another car nearby, a beat-up hatchback I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened. Probably a coworker staying late, I told myself, brushing the doubt aside. I stepped into the building and took the elevator to her floor. The hallways were dimly lit, the faint hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. Most of her team had gone home for the weekend, their cubicles dark and deserted. Catherine's office door was ajar. I moved closer, smiling as I imagined her surprised reaction when I walked in with flowers. But before I could open the door fully, a noise stopped me in my tracks, a low laugh, playful and intimate, followed by a voice I didn't recognize. A man's voice. My stomach dropped. Pressing myself against the wall, I strained to hear more. The muffled voices inside the office grew clearer, interspersed with bursts of laughter and whispered words I couldn't make out. The kind of intimacy no coworker should share. I leaned closer, my heart pounding as I peeked through the crack of the door. My world collapsed in an instant. There was Catherine, perched on the edge of her desk, her blouse unbuttoned just enough to reveal bare skin. Standing between her legs was a man I immediately recognized, Ryan, her secretary. His hands were resting on her hips, his lips brushing her neck. The bouquet slipped from my grasp, the flowers landing silently on the carpet. My chest tightened as I tried to process what I was seeing. The woman I had shared 8 years of my life with, the woman I loved, was giggling in the arms of another man in my office. I stepped back, my mind a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. For a fleeting moment, I considered storming in, making a scene that neither of them would forget. But then I stopped myself. Anger wouldn't solve this. It wouldn't make the betrayal hurt any less. Instead, I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing down the hall. Each step felt like dragging my heart through broken glass. But I kept moving, my face blank as I exited the building and got into my car. As I sat there, staring at the dashboard, my mind raced through a million scenarios. I wanted to scream, to cry, to punch something. But most of all, I wanted answers. And I wasn't going to get them by flying off the handle. The woman I thought I knew had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. If Catherine thought she could shatter my world and walk away unscathed, she was dead wrong. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. If she had rewritten the rules, so would I doubt I didn't sleep that night. The images of Catherine and Ryan replayed in my mind like a haunting slideshow. Her laughter, the way she leaned into him, the softness of her touch, things that used to be mine now twisted into a grotesque betrayal. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my fists clenched as I tried to decide what to do next. By morning I had settled on one thing: I needed confirmation. A part of me wanted to believe there was some logical explanation, some angle I hadn't considered. Maybe I'd misunderstood what I saw. Maybe there was a way out of this nightmare. I spent the morning going through Catherine's phone records. I had access to the account from when I set it up years ago, something she had likely forgotten. As I sifted through the logs, the truth solidified. Late-night calls to Ryan, dozens of texts at all hours of the day. Some marked with heart emojis. My jaw tightened. It wasn't just an affair, it was blatant, and she didn't even care to hide it. Later that afternoon, I sat in my parked car outside her office building, watching. I didn't know exactly what I was waiting for, maybe for her to come outside, maybe for Ryan, but my gut told me this wasn't over. And I was right. At 2:15 p.m., Catherine emerged from the building, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She wasn't alone. Ryan followed close behind, holding the door open for her. She smiled at him, the kind of smile she used to reserve for me, and they got into her car. I trailed them, keeping my distance. I didn't know where they were headed, but I was determined to find out. It didn't take long to realize they weren't heading to a meeting or a client lunch. Catherine's car pulled into a small boutique hotel on the edge of town, the kind that catered to discretion. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I watched them walk inside, her hand brushing against his back as they disappeared through the entrance. I waited in the parking lot for nearly 2 hours, my mind churning. Part of me wanted to storm in and catch them in the act. But something held me back, maybe the realization that I wasn't ready to confront her just yet, or maybe the dark satisfaction of knowing I could use this moment against her later. When they finally emerged, they looked carefree. Ryan was laughing, and Catherine was adjusting her hair, a glow on her face I hadn't seen in months. My stomach churned. That evening, I didn't confront her. Instead, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I asked about her day, pretended to care as she recounted the back-to-back meetings that had left her so drained. I even poured her a glass of wine and rubbed her shoulders while she smiled up at me like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The breaking point came 3 days later. Catherine was working late again, or so she claimed. I decided to surprise her at the office, a repeat of the day I first caught them. This time, though, I brought proof, a small recording device I'd purchased earlier that week. When I arrived, the office was quiet, just like before. Catherine's door was closed, but muffled voices drifted out. I crept closer, my heart hammering in my chest, and placed the device near the door. The sounds coming from inside made my blood boil. Ryan's voice, low and intimate. Catherine's giggles, punctuated by whispered promises that made my stomach churn. But then, something I hadn't expected. "I still can't believe we got away with it," Ryan said, his voice tinged with laughter. "Your husband has no idea, does he?" Catherine's response was a dagger to my chest. "Dean's too naive. He's always been so trusting. And now with this..." She paused, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "He'll never see it coming." "What do you mean?" Ryan asked, curiosity laced in his words. Catherine sighed dramatically. "I found out I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a freight train. My head spun as Ryan laughed, his voice triumphant. "Pregnant? Are you serious?" "As a heart attack," Catherine said. "And you're the father." I stumbled back, the world blurring around me. My wife was pregnant, and it wasn't mine. I left the office in a daze, the recording device still running as I fled to my car. I couldn't face them, not yet. But as I sat in the driver's seat, trembling with rage, a cold clarity settled over me. She thought she'd won. She thought she could betray me, humiliate me, and walk away unscathed. But she was wrong. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. I spent the night in my car, parked a few blocks from home. I couldn't face Catherine, not with her words still echoing in my head. "Pregnant. And you're the father." Every syllable sliced through me like a blade, each cut deeper than the last. By morning, my shock had hardened into something darker, resolve. I wasn't going to crumble, and I wasn't going to lash out in anger. Catherine thought she was clever, but she underestimated me. I was done playing the fool. If she wanted to destroy our life together, I would make sure she didn't walk away unscathed. The first step was securing my position. As the owner of the firm, I had leverage. Catherine had been working under me for months, and while I had given her the job out of love and trust, that trust was now shattered. I couldn't fire her outright, not yet, but I could make life difficult. I called my lawyer, James Whitaker, someone I trusted implicitly. "Dean," James said after hearing me out, "this is brutal. But you're right to be careful. If you're planning to go scorched earth, you need to protect yourself first. Let's talk options." We spent hours going over the details, our shared assets, her position at the company, and, most importantly, the evidence I had. The recording from the office was damning, but James advised me to gather more. "She'll deny it," he warned. "And if this goes to court, you need a rock-solid case." "No," he said, she said. "Concrete proof." I agreed. The thought of biding my time, pretending everything was normal while Catherine carried on with her charade, made my skin crawl. But I knew he was right. Over the next week, I worked meticulously to prepare. I installed hidden cameras in the house, discreetly placed in common areas, including the living room and kitchen. I set up trackers on her phone and car, ensuring I could monitor her movements without her knowledge. Every moment she spent with Ryan was another nail in her coffin. Meanwhile, I played the dutiful husband. Catherine seemed oblivious to my growing resentment, mistaking my calm demeanor for ignorance. She was radiant in a way that made me sick, her smiles wider, her mood lighter. "I have news," she said one evening over dinner, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Oh?" I asked, forcing a smile. She bit her lip, her cheeks flushing. "I'm pregnant." I felt my stomach churn, but I kept my expression neutral. "That's incredible," I said, feigning joy. "I had no idea you were trying." She laughed, a nervous edge to the sound. "It just kind of happened. A surprise, really." I wanted to ask if Ryan knew yet, but I held my tongue. "Well, congratulations to us," I said instead, raising my glass. She smiled, leaning across the table to kiss me. I let her, my skin crawling at the contact. When she excused herself to take a call, likely from Ryan, I stared at the untouched food on my plate, my mind racing. Her audacity was almost admirable. She thought she could lie to my face, carry another man's child, and I would never know. But she was wrong. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Catherine had claimed she was staying late at the office for another round of client meetings. I already knew the truth. My tracking app showed her car parked at the same boutique hotel she'd taken Ryan to before. I waited until she got home, her cheeks flushed and hair slightly disheveled. She slipped off her heels at the door, humming to herself as if she hadn't just spent the evening screwing her secretary. "Hey, babe," she said, spotting me on the couch. "You're up late." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, my tone even. She nodded, heading to the kitchen for a glass of water. I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Catherine," I said, leaning against the counter. "We need to talk." She froze, her back to me. Slowly she turned, her expression guarded. "What's up?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it up so she could see the screen. The recording of her and Ryan played, her laughter and whispers unmistakable. Her face strained of color. "Dean, don't," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Don't lie to me, Catherine. I know everything." Her lips parted, but no words came out. For once, she was speechless. "You've been screwing him in my office," I continued, my voice eerily calm. "Carrying his child. And you thought I wouldn't find out?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "Dean, it's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I spat. "And now you're going to pay for it." Her tears spilled over, but I turned away, heading upstairs to the bedroom. She followed me, pleading, but I slammed the door in her face. This was just the beginning. She thought she could destroy me, but she underestimated what I was capable of. By the time I was done, she'd wish she had never crossed me. Catherine didn't sleep in the bedroom that night. I heard her pacing downstairs, her muffled sobs echoing through the otherwise silent house. Normally I might have felt a pang of guilt, but now, nothing. Her tears were a currency she had overused, and I wasn't buying it anymore. The next morning, she emerged from the kitchen, her face pale and blotchy. She looked like a shadow of the confident woman she had been just a few days ago. "Dean," she began hesitantly, her voice small. "Can we talk?" I glanced up from my laptop, my expression neutral. "I think you've said enough." Her lower lip quivered, but she pushed on. "I know I messed up, but can we at least try to fix this? For us? For the baby?" The baby? The nerve of her to invoke that. I felt a surge of rage but kept my voice steady. "You mean Ryan's baby?" I said, my words dripping with venom. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "A stupid, horrible mistake." I set my laptop aside and stood, towering over her. "A mistake is spilling coffee, Catherine. You don't accidentally screw your secretary and get pregnant. That's a choice. A deliberate betrayal." Her tears started again, but I wasn't in the mood to play the role of a sympathetic husband. I walked past her, grabbing my keys. "I'll be out for the day. Don't wait up." In the days that followed, I began putting my plan into motion. Catherine's betrayal had cut deep, but if she thought she was going to walk away unscathed, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Step 1. Securing the company. I called an emergency meeting with my senior partners, framing it as a routine discussion about firm policies. During the meeting, I introduced a new clause to our employee contracts, a strict policy regarding fraternization and relationships between employees. Officially, it was about maintaining professionalism in the workplace, but in reality, it was a preemptive strike. I wanted Ryan out of the company, and this policy gave me the leverage I needed to do it without raising suspicion. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Ryan, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, continued to act smug, as if he had pulled one over on me. But when he was called into HR 2 days later, his confidence began to crack. "What's this about?" Ryan asked, trying to sound casual as he sat across from me in the conference room. I slid a folder across the table, the new policy outlined in bold text. "We've recently updated our employee code of conduct," I said smoothly. "It's come to our attention that you've violated this policy." His face paled as he skimmed the document. "I don't understand." "You've been having a relationship with Catherine," I said bluntly, cutting him off. "It's against company policy. Effective immediately, you're terminated." He sputtered, his confidence unraveling. "You can't do this." I can," I said coldly, standing. "And I just did." Security escorted him out of the building before he could make more of a scene. The satisfaction I felt was fleeting, but it was a start. Step 2. Dismantling Catherine's life. I began compiling the evidence I had against her, the recordings, the photos from the hotel, the phone logs. My lawyer, James, was working on the divorce papers, ensuring everything was airtight. I wasn't just ending the marriage, I was making sure she walked away with nothing. Catherine's downfall began in earnest the day I handed her the papers. She was sitting in the living room when I walked in, her phone in hand as she scrolled aimlessly. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening when she saw the folder in my hands. "What's that?" she asked cautiously. "Your future," I said, tossing it onto the coffee table. She hesitated before picking it up, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Her face strained of color as she realized what it was. "You're divorcing me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What did you expect?" I snapped. "That I'd just forgive you and play happy family with you and Ryan's kid?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Dean, please. We can work through this." "No, Catherine," I said, cutting her off. "You destroyed this marriage. You made your choice. And now you'll deal with the consequences." Her pleas fell on deaf ears as I walked away. She had dug this grave, and I wasn't about to climb in with her. Step 3. Public humiliation. Catherine's betrayal wasn't going to stay private. She had shattered my life, so I made sure everyone knew the truth. The recordings found their way to our mutual friends and family, painting a clear picture of what she had done. Her carefully curated image of the perfect wife crumbled overnight. Calls and messages flooded in, some from friends offering sympathy, others expressing shock at Catherine's actions. She became a pariah, ostracized from the social circles she had once thrived in. The final nail in the coffin came when her pregnancy became public knowledge. People quickly put 2 and 2 together, and the whispers turned into full-blown gossip. Catherine went from being admired to being pitted, or worse, scorned. But I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning of her descent. In the days following my confrontation with Catherine, I slipped into a carefully crafted facade. To her, I appeared weary but willing to move forward, which was exactly the impression I wanted to give. I needed her guard down, her movements predictable. Every act of kindness, every calm conversation, was a calculated maneuver. Catherine, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my surface, played the role of the remorseful wife. She apologized profusely, claiming she wanted to repair what we had. But her actions spoke louder than her hollow words. Her late-night texts, her suspicious phone calls, the lingering scent of Ryan's cologne when she came home, all of it confirmed that she was still tangled in her web of deceit. I worked behind the scenes, setting the stage for my revenge. First, I made moves to secure my assets. I shifted funds out of our joint accounts into accounts she didn't know existed, ensuring she wouldn't have access to the money I had worked so hard to earn. I contacted my lawyer, who was already preparing divorce papers, and hired a private investigator to document every sordid detail of her affair. The most important piece of the puzzle, however, was the office. Catherine had no idea that I had full access to her work computer, thanks to the IT department. I pored over her emails and calendar entries, discovering the hidden depths of her duplicity. She had not only been using company resources to cover her tracks but also scheduling her rendezvous with Ryan during work hours, on my payroll. Armed with this evidence, I began planting seeds of doubt in the office. Casual remarks to colleagues about Catherine's dedication to late nights, jokes about her close working relationship with Ryan. I was careful not to be overt, but the whispers began to spread. Then, I devised the perfect trap. On Friday morning, Catherine kissed me on the cheek before heading to work, her usual chipper self. She had no idea I'd be following her, watching as she once again met Ryan at the boutique hotel. I waited until they were safely inside before stepping out of my car, camera in hand. I snapped pictures of her car parked next to his, the two of them entering the hotel together. I even captured a shot of the room service cart being delivered to their room, 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and a bouquet of roses. Once I had what I needed, I made my way to the front desk. "Good afternoon," I said, flashing my most disarming smile. "I believe my wife checked in earlier with a Mr. Ryan Jenkins. Could you confirm the room number?" The receptionist hesitated, glancing nervously at her screen. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't release that information." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I'm not looking to cause trouble. But she's having an affair, and I'd hate for this to get messy. If you could just confirm the number, it would save everyone a lot of grief." After a moment's pause, she relented, scribbling the room number on a piece of paper. "Room 214. I smiled, tucking the paper into my pocket. "Thank you. This stays between us." With my evidence secured, I left without confronting them. It wasn't time for the grand reveal just yet. The following Monday, I arrived at the office early. My lawyer had arranged a meeting with the board of directors to present the evidence of Catherine and Ryan's misconduct. The room was filled with murmurs as I handed out printed copies of emails, photos, and hotel receipts, each one more damning than the last. "Catherine and Ryan have been engaging in an inappropriate relationship," I said, my voice steady. "They've used company time and resources to conduct their affair, compromising the integrity of this firm. As the CEO, I cannot allow this behavior to go unchecked." The board members looked at the evidence, their expressions a mix of shock and disgust. Catherine's glowing reputation was about to crumble, and I was savoring every moment. By the time Catherine arrived at work, the entire office was buzzing with rumors. She walked in, her head held high, completely unaware of what was waiting for her. I called her into my office, locking the door behind us. "We need to talk," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. She opened it, her face draining of color as she flipped through the evidence. "Dean, Save it," I interrupted, my tone icy. "The board has already been informed. You're suspended effective immediately, pending termination. Pack your things." Her eyes filled with tears as she reached across the desk, pleading. "Dean, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake." I stood, towering over her. "A mistake?" "This wasn't a mistake, Catherine. It was a choice, a calculated, selfish choice. And now, you're going to face the consequences." She broke down, sobbing as security escorted her out of the building. Ryan followed shortly after, his smug grin replaced by panic when he realized the fallout would cost him his job. I wasn't done yet. That evening, I filed the divorce papers and sent Catherine a text, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Consider this your official notice." When the story of their affair broke at the office, Catherine became a pariah. Friends stopped returning her calls, her professional reputation in ruins. Ryan disappeared into obscurity, his career in advertising effectively over. But the cherry on top? I leaked the photos and emails to Catherine's family. Her parents, staunchly traditional and proud of their perfect daughter, were devastated. The shame was enough to drive them to cut ties with her entirely. As I stood in the ruins of what had once been my marriage, I felt no pity for Catherine. She had destroyed our life together, and I had made sure she paid for it. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned for us, but it was the one she had earned. The days following Catherine's downfall were a whirlwind. While she scrambled to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, I focused on moving forward. My lawyer had made swift work of the divorce proceedings. Catherine was served the papers the morning after she was fired, delivered to the dingy hotel she'd been staying in since she was escorted out of my home. I expected anger, tears, maybe even a desperate attempt at reconciliation. Instead, I got a text that dripped with venom. "You're a monster, Dean. You've ruined my life." I stared at the message, my lips curling into a bitter smile. I ruined your life? The irony was almost laughable. My thumbs hovered over the screen as I debated responding, but what was the point? She didn't deserve my words anymore. Instead, I deleted the message and forwarded it to my lawyer. I wasn't actively keeping tabs on Catherine, but word had a way of getting back to me. A few former coworkers she'd managed to stay in touch with leaked bits and pieces of her downward spiral. She'd been blacklisted in the local industry, her affair with Ryan having made its rounds in every office gossip mill. Nobody wanted to touch her professionally, and she'd resorted to taking out freelance jobs that paid far less than what she was used to. Ryan hadn't fared much better. Fired and humiliated, he packed up and moved back to his hometown, leaving Catherine to deal with the fallout alone. But the cruelest blow came when her parents officially disowned her. Catherine's family was old-fashioned, and the scandal had embarrassed them beyond repair. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that her father had said, if she had any sense of decency, she'd have walked away before dragging us all into her mess. The betrayal was complete, she had nowhere left to turn. As Catherine's life crumbled, mine steadily improved. I threw myself into work, channeling the anger and hurt into productivity. The firm was thriving, and with Catherine and Ryan gone, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. But revenge wasn't the balm I thought it would be. Yes, there was satisfaction in watching her fall apart, but there was also a hollowness that lingered, a gaping void where love and trust had once been. It wasn't until I received a phone call from my lawyer that I realized just how far Catherine's desperation had taken her. "Dean, I've just been informed that Catherine intends to contest the divorce settlement," James said, his tone laced with annoyance. "On what grounds?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "She's claiming financial hardship, citing the child as a factor." My grip on the phone tightened. "The child isn't mine." "I know," James replied. "But she's arguing that you should be held partially responsible since the affair happened during the marriage. She's trying to milk this for all it's worth." I pinched the bridge of my nose, forcing myself to stay calm. "What's our next move?" "Let her file," he said confidently. "We'll counter with the evidence you've already provided. There's no way a judge will side with her, especially after everything we've documented. But be prepared, she's not going to make this easy." I decided not to confront Catherine directly. Instead, I let her actions dictate the next steps. Weeks passed, and sure enough, her petition landed on my doorstep. She was seeking a significant portion of my assets, claiming emotional and financial duress. It was laughable, really. The woman who had used my resources to fund her affair was now playing the victim. The court date came faster than expected. Catherine showed up looking haggard, her once perfect appearance marred by stress and exhaustion. She barely glanced at me as we sat across the courtroom, her lawyer rattling off a list of demands that sounded more like a bad joke than a legal argument. When it was my turn, my lawyer presented the mountain of evidence we'd compiled, the recordings, the photos, the hotel receipts. James left no stone unturned, painting a picture of Catherine as a manipulative liar who had betrayed her husband and abused the trust of his company. By the time he finished, the judge looked unimpressed with Catherine's claims. The ruling was swift and merciless. Catherine was awarded a modest settlement, just enough to get by, and no more. Her request for spousal support was denied, as was any claim to my business or assets. As we left the courtroom, Catherine approached me, her face a mix of fury and desperation. "You're going to regret this," she hissed, her voice low. I met her gaze, my expression cold. "I already regret giving you 8 years of my life. Don't make me regret more." She opened her mouth to respond, but I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone on the courthouse steps. Back at home, I poured myself a drink and stood by the window, watching the sunset. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The revenge I had so carefully orchestrated was complete, but it didn't bring me the closure I'd hoped for. Catherine was gone, but the scars she left behind remained. I knew they would fade with time, but for now, I let myself feel the weight of them. This wasn't a happy ending, it wasn't meant to be. But it was an ending, and sometimes, that's enough. Catherine's face was pale and drawn as she stood outside the courthouse, her defeat visible in the slump of her shoulders. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might finally accept her loss. But Catherine wasn't the kind of woman to bow out gracefully. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later when I received a call from James. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "What now?" I asked, though I already knew it had something to do with Catherine. "She's filed a petition for custody of the child," James said. "She's claiming you're the biological father." The air left my lungs. "That's impossible. We both know the child isn't mine." "She's banking on the court's reluctance to deny the child a father figure," James explained. "She's playing dirty, Dean. And it's going to get worse before it gets better." I didn't waste any time. I called Catherine that night, my voice cold and clipped. "You want to drag this through the courts? Fine. But we're doing a DNA test." Her silence stretched for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally she said, "You can't just demand that." "Oh, I can," I replied, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "And I will. Because the moment that test proves the baby isn't mine, your case falls apart." She stammered something about not wanting to traumatize the child, but I cut her off. "You started this, Catherine. You wanted war? Now you've got one." The test was scheduled for the following week. Catherine showed up with her lawyer, her demeanor icy but nervous. The process was quick, cheek swabs for me, Catherine, and the baby. As I handed my sample to the technician, I locked eyes with her. "When this comes back, and you're exposed for the liar you are, I want you to remember this moment," I said. "Remember that you did this to yourself." The results arrived 3 days later. I sat in James's office, the envelope in my hands. My heart pounded as I tore it open and scanned the page. Paternity probability, 0%. I exhaled sharply, a mixture of relief and rage coursing through me. "It's over," I muttered, handing the paper to James. He smiled grimly. "It's a death blow to her case. We'll file a motion to dismiss immediately." The next court appearance was swift and brutal. James presented the DNA results, leaving no room for Catherine's lies to take root. Her lawyer tried to argue that I had acted as a father figure, but the judge shut him down. "This court does not reward deceit," the judge said sternly. "The plaintiff's claims are dismissed." Catherine's face crumpled, her bravado finally cracking. She looked at me as if hoping for mercy, but I gave her none. I thought that would be the end of it, but Catherine had one more play. A few nights later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find her standing there, drenched from the rain, her eyes red and puffy. "Dean," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I have nowhere else to go." I stared at her, my mind racing. This was the same woman who had torn my life apart, who had tried to destroy me out of sheer spite. And now here she was, begging for my help. "You're joking," I said, crossing my arms. "Please," she said, stepping closer. "I made a mistake. I miss us." I laughed bitterly. "You miss the life you destroyed, Catherine. There is no us anymore. There hasn't been for a long time." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "You're on your own now," I said. "Good luck." I slammed the door, her sobs muffled by the sound of rain pounding against the windows. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I felt the weight of everything I'd been through. Catherine's betrayal had torn me apart, but it had also forced me to rebuild. She thought she could manipulate me, break me, and walk away unscathed. But in the end, it was Catherine who had been left with nothing. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The rain outside was relentless that night, hammering against the windows as I sat in the silence of my living room. Catherine's desperate plea at the door replayed in my mind, her broken voice and tear-streaked face a stark contrast to the arrogant woman who had betrayed me. I didn't feel pity. Not for her. Not after everything she'd done. But there was something sobering about seeing someone who had once been so confident reduced to nothing but desperation. She had burned every bridge she had, and now she was drowning in the ashes. I wasn't finished yet, though. There were still loose ends to tie up, and I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. The divorce was finalized within weeks. The settlement was minimal, thanks to James and the overwhelming evidence of her infidelity. She had no claim to my assets, no spousal support, and no foothold in my life anymore. She walked away with little more than the clothes she owned, and even those didn't seem to fit her anymore. I didn't see her the day the papers were signed. She chose to file her portion remotely, avoiding what I'm sure would have been unbearable humiliation. That was fine by me. I didn't need to see her face again to know I'd won. While Catherine faded into obscurity, I took the time to rebuild the parts of my life she hadn't managed to destroy. My friendships and family relationships had taken a hit during the ordeal, partly because I'd been so consumed by the betrayal and revenge. One evening, I sat down with my younger sister, Emily, over dinner. She had been one of the few people to openly voice her anger when she learned about Catherine's betrayal. "Are you okay now?" she asked hesitantly, swirling her wine glass as she studied me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. "Honestly? I don't know. I've spent so much time tearing her down that I haven't thought much about what comes next." Emily nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Well, you deserve to think about yourself for once. She's gone. It's over. Time to figure out what makes you happy again." Her words stayed with me long after she'd left. What did make me happy? For years it had been Catherine. Or at least, the illusion of her. Now that the truth had been laid bare, I wasn't sure who I was without the weight of our marriage. Occasionally, word about Catherine's life would reach me through mutual acquaintances. She had tried to start fresh in a new city but had found it nearly impossible to escape the reputation she had earned. Every job she applied for turned her away once they realized who she was, and her attempts to mend ties with her family had been met with cold silence. The child she had been so sure would be her anchor, her leverage, was now a constant reminder of her mistakes. I heard she had moved into a rundown apartment in a less than desirable part of town. She was working odd jobs, barely scraping by. I could have found satisfaction in her suffering, but I didn't. What I felt was emptiness. Watching someone's life fall apart didn't rebuild mine. Months after the divorce, as I sat in my office late one evening, there was a knock at the door. I glanced up, surprised to see one of my employees standing there, looking nervous. "Mr. Dean," she said cautiously, stepping inside. "There's someone in the lobby asking to see you." Catherine." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "Tell her I'm unavailable." She said it's urgent. The employee pressed. "Something about needing help." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Against my better judgment, I agreed to see her. When she walked into my office, I barely recognized her. Catherine looked thinner, her face drawn and pale. Her once perfect hair was unkempt, and she wore clothes that looked like they'd been pulled from the clearance rack of a thrift store. "Dean," she started, her voice shaky. "What do you want, Catherine?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. I need help," she said, her eyes welling with tears. I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I don't have anyone else. That's not my problem, I replied, leaning back in my chair. You made your choices. Now you live with them. She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. Please! Just hear me out. I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But my child doesn't deserve to suffer because of what I did. Her child. Ryan's child. I stared at her for a long moment, letting her desperation hang in the air. Finally, I stood and walked to the door, holding it open. You're right, I said. Your child doesn't deserve to suffer. But neither did I. And I won't waste another second of my life cleaning up your messes. Good luck, Catherine. You'll need it. She hesitated, her face crumpling as the weight of my words hit her. Without another word, she turned and walked out of my office, her head bowed in defeat. I closed the door behind her, locking it as I leaned against the wood. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. After Catherine left my office that night, I never saw her again. Whatever remnants of our shared life still lingered were now completely severed. She had come to me as a desperate woman, hoping for a glimmer of kindness, but I'd given her the same cold indifference she had shown me during her betrayal. And that was the last I allowed her to occupy space in my life. The months that followed were quieter, almost unsettling in their calm. For years, my life had been defined by chaos, first by the strain of trying to maintain a failing marriage, then by the firestorm of betrayal and revenge. Now, with all of it behind me, I faced something I hadn't in years: peace. But peace wasn't as easy to accept as I'd hoped. It came with its own challenges, forcing me to confront the cracks in myself that Catherine's betrayal had exposed. I didn't trust easily anymore, and every interaction felt weighed down by caution. I threw myself into work, expanding the business in ways I'd always talked about but never acted on. A new branch of the firm opened in another city, and with it came new challenges to keep me occupied. Success became my anchor, the one thing I could control in a world that had felt so chaotic for so long. Though I'd vowed to leave Catherine behind, her shadow lingered in small, unexpected ways. I'd occasionally overhear whispers about her, mutual acquaintances mentioning how she'd moved to a smaller town, barely scraping by. Once I heard a rumor that she was working as a waitress in some rundown diner, struggling to make ends meet while juggling life as a single mother. Ryan, it seemed, had disappeared entirely, leaving her to raise the child on her own. I didn't care enough to verify these stories. Whether she was thriving or failing didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she was no longer my problem. Eventually, the void Catherine had left in my life began to fill with new experiences. I found joy in simple things: weekend hikes, quiet nights at home, the occasional evening out with friends. At one point, my sister Emily tried to set me up with someone she knew. She's sweet, Emily had insisted. And smart. You'd like her. I'd hesitated, still scarred by the wreckage Catherine had left behind. But eventually I agreed. The woman, Samantha, was everything Emily had promised. She was kind and intelligent, with a quiet confidence that made her instantly endearing. We started slow, meeting for coffee and chatting about books and music. There was no rush, no pressure. For the first time in years, I felt myself letting my guard down, trusting someone again. One evening, months after Catherine's desperate visit to my office, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." I almost deleted it without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was brief, almost painfully so. Dean, I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I regret everything. I was selfish and blind, and I destroyed something I didn't deserve to have in the first place. I hope you find happiness, even if I never do. Catherine. I stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. There was no satisfaction in her apology, no vindication. If anything, it felt hollow, a final, pitiful attempt to absolve herself of guilt. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop and went to bed, leaving Catherine's words to fade into the void where they belong. By the time the anniversary of my divorce rolled around, I felt like a different man. Stronger. Wiser. Hardened, perhaps, but not broken. Catherine had taken so much from me, but she hadn't taken everything. She hadn't taken my ability to rebuild, to find joy in the small things, or to create a life that was entirely my own. As I stood on my balcony that evening, a glass of whiskey in hand, I thought about the man I had been a year ago, the one who had trusted too easily, loved too blindly, and fought so hard to keep something that was already gone. I wasn't that man anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that was a good thing.